And again, if you're participating today, this webinar is all about the Illinois Accelerated Placement Act, what parents need to know before gifted testing. And just to give you a brief background about who I am a Chicago-based parent, and I have children within the Chicago Public School District. And my journey started back at 2000 when I had kids. And it was a real complicated process for myself in terms of navigating and finding the best school and the best resource available for my children, who at the time and still today, I believe are very, very bright. And I found the process to be very convoluted. And back then, there wasn't a whole lot of information and resources available to a parent who was looking for opportunities to challenge their child. But now there are more resources, and even today, there's a brand new law that we want to be able to share with you the details. But before going further, I want to start off by, let's get a poll. We've got about 10 people or so, a dozen people on the call. Oh, people are still joining. So we're going to hold off on that poll. I see that people are still joining us. So I'll continue with sort of the background and about myself. I became involved in sort of the gifted space because of my children and living in Chicago. I found out that there was a process called selective enrollment testing. And again, as I stated earlier, I was a new mom, not familiar with the process of finding the best neighborhood opportunity or gifted enrollment process. It was quite alarming for me and frustrating to understand what the whole testing process was about. So within the city of Chicago, there's a process called selective enrollment, where you would test and take a particular test, and based on that test and some other factors, your child may qualify for one of the either regional gifted centers or the classical schools, which in both cases, both of the programs are accelerated programs. And we're going to talk more about acceleration and what that really means. So I really started off, for those of you who are coming into the scene and you're not sure about what this act is about, or you have preschoolers and you're just getting your feet wet in terms of understanding the way the process works, or some of you may not even be within the Chicago Public School District. You may be joining us from other areas of the state of Illinois, and that's fine. We welcome you. So we've got lots of information to share. So within Chicago Public School District, there is a testing process called selective enrollment, and that was the avenue that my children went through in terms of being identified as a high achiever and getting into some of their the academic centers that they have available. Through the process, I really became involved with supporting my children. They had different learning styles. And over time, I wanted to support other families as well. So I developed a critical thinking boot camp and also some parent training sessions. I've been doing this for well over a decade because honestly, I didn't want parents to have to go through the feeling and emotions and the sense of frustration that I went through as a new mom, navigating the process, trying to find enrichment opportunities and services. And luckily for me, I was able to come across the Northwestern CTD enrichment opportunity, which we participated in as well. And we'll talk more about that. We'll have Eric share with you his involvement in that program. But suffice it to say, I come today because my role is really to bring resources to parents so that you can be empowered to be able to understand how your child learns best. So I've developed a whole program called the Critical Thinking Child and the Critical Thinking Bootcamp, which runs a year-round program. As you can see here in this picture, that's a snapshot of our classroom environment, where we work with children to who maybe have limited verbal skills because they're bilingual and perhaps they want to test for the selective enrollment exam. We also work with children who are shy, or children who may be higher in one particular subject matter, for example, like reading, and they may need an extra boost in math or vice versa. So we really try to cater it to meeting each child where they are currently at. And from there, we develop a plan to help them become engaged and to provide academic enrichment. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to turn it over to Eric. But before we do, why don't we go ahead and get started with taking our poll. And again, for those of you that are joining us, if you have questions, please put it in the chat area. We will monitor that chat area and hopefully be able to answer all of your questions today. So thank you for joining. At this time, we have a few questions just so we can get to know you better. There are 3 questions here. It may take a minute to come up on your screen. If somebody can just type in the chat if you're able to see the poll at this time. The first question is, are you located in School District 299? 299, that's Chicago Public School District. That's either yes or no. And it's fine if you're not located in Chicago. The information, for the most part, regarding the Act is applicable statewide. And there's some wonderful resources that we're going to share at the end. So be sure to stay so that you can get access to that. The second question is your child in a gifted or accelerated program at school now? So is your child currently in a gifted program, whether that's a pull-out program or a push-in where they have an instructor that comes and works one-on-one with your child, or perhaps you're in a program where the entire school is labeled as a gifted program, working at an accelerated pace, either a year or 2 years above grade level. And then the last question, if you can help us out with this, please identify your role. If you're a parent or caregiver, we'd like to know that, or perhaps you're joined us as an educator or teacher. And in some cases, we sometimes have students that will join us as well. So please indicate accordingly. Okay, we've got a few of you who have not completed the poll yet. Give it a few more minutes there. Okay, great. Yeah, we just want to get a sense of what your role is and how we can better assist you with some of the events and programming that we'll be planning throughout the rest of the school year. Okay. Can we see the results? Okay, we have someone who raised their hand. Hello, hello. Raise your hand if you can hear me. I want to make sure that you can hear me. Okay, I'm looking at the chat question. Oh, you can hear me, but you can't hear Eric. earlier. Okay, we'll get the audio fixed for Eric. I can see that. Thank you for letting me know. Are
And
you
I just
able?
muted for a second there, so hopefully you
Oh,
can.
no. Okay, no problem. I'm just going through the chat before we get started, just making sure that we don't have any audio concerns. So we have myself and Eric on right now. Can you hear Eric? Yes. Okay.
Great.
So just to recap, we have 70% that are within CPS, District 299. And then we also have about 30% that currently has a child in a gifted program at their school right now. And we have 100% who are parents or educators. Awesome. That's great. Okay. Now that we have an idea, we can go ahead and Eric, I'll let you take it over and let's tell the parents all about this new act and how it can help them.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you again for the invitation to participate in this. We're pretty excited about everything that's going on with the legislation. I'm just going to pull up my screen here so I can share with you a few slides. So hopefully everybody can see this okay. Can you see the slides on your screen?
I can see them.
Wonderful. Okay.
Yes.
My name is Eric Calvert. I am at the Center for Talent Development at Northwestern University. If you're not familiar with us, we're a comprehensive gifted education and talent development center that's based within the School of Education and Social Policy at Northwestern University. I wear several hats. One of those is with CTD, and at the center, we provide online programs for advanced K-12 students year-round. We also offer weekend enrichment programs, summer camps, and service learning and leadership programs for advanced students. And I would encourage everybody to follow us on social media. We're at CTD at NU on both Twitter and Facebook. Because we like to share a lot of research and resources for families about new discoveries about how talent develops, as well as strategies and resources to help with some of the commonly encountered issues when you're trying to raise a gifted student and make sure that they're doing well academically, but also are happy and healthy socially, emotionally. But that's kind of my day job. And then on the side, I'm also heavily invested with the Illinois Association for Gifted Children. And that's the primary advocacy organization in the state of Illinois that supports gifted students, advanced learners, their families, as well as educators that are working to ensure that every student has the right kind of challenge and the support they need in order to be able to realize their potential. My main role with the Illinois Association for Gifted Children is as the co-chair of the Policy and Advocacy Committee. I do a lot of work there with Carolyn Welch. She's the other co-chair of that group. And one of the things that we're most proud of is being able to successfully advance legislation this past year that's going to create new opportunities for students to be accelerated. So that's mainly what we're going to talk about today. But if you have questions about other issues related to gifted or advanced students, feel free to reach out to us on social media as well. We can share information offline. So let's start with just a little bit of background information. So in the context of this webinar and in the context of this new law that Illinois has, what do we mean when we say acceleration? So broadly speaking, acceleration means providing access to curriculum and instruction that would typically be provided for children who are older to a younger student. or providing opportunities for rapid learners to be able to move through curriculum at a more advanced pace than the typical student. There are many forms of acceleration, but the three specific kinds of acceleration that were addressed in the Illinois Accelerated Placement Act, which is this new law. And in the resources at the end, we can kind of share information with you about how you can access the full text of this. But the important things to know about the law are, one, that it requires local school boards, so public school districts all around the state of Illinois, to adopt over this past summer policies on acceleration that provide opportunities for at least three kinds of accelerated placement. The first is early school entrance. So that is a student who would be admitted to kindergarten before their 5th birthday, or to first grade before they've completed kindergarten or before they turn 6 years old. The second form of acceleration that the district policies need to address is what we refer to as whole grade acceleration. You might have heard of whole grade acceleration being referred to as early promotion or grade skipping, but an example of this would be, let's say I was a 2nd grader last year and was really advanced. And so this fall, when I'm coming back to school, instead of going from 2nd grade to 3rd grade, I'm going to bypass the 3rd grade and go directly into the 4th grade. And then the third type of acceleration that the local policies are to address is what we call subject acceleration. And that's where we don't have a student that does a whole grade skip or move up a level in every subject area, but where you might have a student who is particularly advanced in, let's say, math, but more typical in their development with other 3rd graders in reading. And so they might go up a grade level or more to access the more advanced math curriculum, but otherwise stay with their same age peers for instruction in other subject areas. So does that make sense so far? Let us know if you have any questions in the chat box. There are also several other forms of acceleration that districts may choose to address in their local policies. These other kinds of acceleration aren't mandated in the law, but districts may address these. So these might be things that you could ask about with your local district. But such strategies as curriculum compacting, an example of that might be where we take 3 years worth of curriculum and compact that into a 2-year sequence. We're actually working on a grant project in collaboration with the Columbus Public Schools in Ohio right now to do just that with middle school students. So that's one example. Another form that acceleration can take is multi-age or multi-grade grouping, where we take students that are from multiple grade levels but have similar learning needs and group them together. So instead of having everybody in a grade level being the same age plus or minus a year, you might have a 2 or 3 grade span so that some of those younger students can have access to the more advanced curriculum. Sometimes we also refer to dual enrollment programs as forms of acceleration. So if you have an older student that is in high school that's taking courses from a college or university or community college where they're earning both high school and college credit, that would be dual enrollment. And then finally, early graduation from high school, where a student graduates in less than the 12 typical years that students are in school. So let's talk a bit about why IAGC felt that this was such an important issue to try to address in advocacy and in policy. The main reason why we wanted to pursue this is that there is a ton of research that documents the fact that acceleration is a really beneficial strategy to use with many advanced students. An important thing to realize is that, if you look at all of the research that's been done at all of the different approaches that have been used in schools to try to help make sure that gifted students and advanced learners reach their full potential, acceleration comes out at the top in terms of producing the most additional learning gains versus the default standard curriculum. And so we think this is something that should be more widely available than it is. And then the second piece on the academic growth that I'll mention, because I know that this is often one area of concern. Sometimes families and educators worry that if a student skips a grade or skips ahead in a subject area, that this is going to leave holes in their knowledge that at some point in the future is going to cause a big problem for those students. But one thing that I'd like to provide a little bit of reassurance about is that the evidence is pretty solid that when students are high achieving at the time that they're accelerated, most of those students are very able to be able to kind of backfill that knowledge base to where they continue to be successful going forward. And what's interesting is that they not only catch up with typical students at the grade level to which they're accelerated, but often over about a 2-year period, they actually catch up to the other gifted students that are a year older at that grade level. And we've seen this over and over in many schools and even in some of our own programs here at CTD. So academically, we think this is something that needs to be widely available. The other reason why we thought it was important to do advocacy around this issue is that many educators acknowledge that there's an academic benefit to acceleration, but often educators try to dissuade families from pursuing accelerated placement because there's this idea that it's socially and emotionally harmful for a student to be with a group that is a different age or to move a student from one peer group to another peer group. The good news is that looking back again over 100 years of research, and there was a great study that we'll share with you through social media after this, that actually analyzed more than a dozen studies going back over 100 years. And what it found is that for the vast majority of students who are academically accelerated, it has no long-term impact on their self-concept, their self-esteem, or their sense of personal well-being. And in fact, some particularly advanced students actually report that it's easier for them to make friends and to feel included when they're with older students because it's easier for them to find other kids that think like they do, that are interested in the things that they do, etc. And so I wanted to share that so that you'll have this information to share when you talk with your district. The other point that we'd like to make is that it's actually not healthy for kids to not be challenged. And one area that my colleagues and I here at CTD have been studying lately is an area called executive functioning. And I think, Lemuel, you probably touch on this some in your programs as well. But what executive functioning is the ability to regulate your own attention, the ability to set priorities and manage your own time and make good choices with what you do. And one thing that's really jumped out of this research is that executive functioning doesn't seem to be something that develops automatically, that you automatically get because you have high cognitive ability or you're a very intelligent student. It really seems like executive functioning develops when it needs to develop. In other words, if I don't experience some degree of challenge and need to learn to focus while I'm in elementary school, middle school, and high school, then even though I might be the brightest student in my college classroom, and I might have the highest ACT scores or the highest SAT scores going in, if I've never been challenged to where I've had to develop some of those study skills and time management skills, I'm actually at a higher risk of not successfully completing my degree program. And so we don't want kids to feel overwhelmed, but we want kids to feel a degree of challenge when they're in school. Finally, we wanted to respond to some new research from Jonathan Plucker, who's the new president of the National Association for Gifted Children, of which the Illinois Association is a state affiliate. But he published some research with the Fordham Foundation that looked at when we look at students that are advanced or bright in the early grades, are they maintaining that level of achievement or continuing to grow, or are they falling behind? And one of the things that was really shocking out of that data is that when they looked at what they refer to as excellence gaps, so differences in achievement for members of different economic subgroups and different races, they found that at the early grades, there were many students from lower income backgrounds and from different racial subgroups that were near the top, that were performing at high levels. But each year, students move through school as they matriculate from grade to grade. This excellence gap between these subgroups gets wider and wider and wider, which tells us that there are a lot of bright students out there that have a ton of potential, that because they're not receiving the kinds of challenge and support that they need in school, they're not able to develop that. And so while they might be, among the brightest students in the state when they start school, that ability works like a rubber band. If it's not stretched over time, it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And so by the time they reach high school and go off to college, they can be just an average achiever or even an underachiever who's at risk for failure. And so, we can't afford to waste potential. And so we wanted to address that in our advocacy. So that's a little bit of background on why we're doing what we're doing. But now I want to share a little bit of information that you should know in terms of how this is going to impact individual school districts. So a few things that are important to take away about the requirements for these local policies that districts have to develop. One, even though many students that would benefit from acceleration might also qualify to be identified as a quote-unquote gifted student, and while many gifted students would benefit from acceleration, acceleration shouldn't be limited to just those students who are formally identified as gifted, because we know in a lot of schools, if there's not a formal gifted program, there's not a process for gifted identification. But even where there are programs, there should be other opportunities. Second, the law requires that local policies provide processes for communicating to parents or guardians about the process and including them in the process. So there's an opportunity to share your knowledge of your students and their needs and be a part of that decision making. Third, there need to be procedures for notifying parents or guardians of decisions affecting a child's participation in an accelerated placement, so that you can monitor your students' progress over time and be their advocate. And finally, it needs to be easy for families and educators to access the referral process, so that if you believe your student might benefit from acceleration and you want to have an evaluation, you're not running around in circles like Lamiola had to, trying to figure out who the person is that you need to talk to, what the process is. That should be transparent, and that should be equitable for all families. A few other key provisions are, one, that there are procedures for annually informing educators and families about opportunities for acceleration and how students would be evaluated within a district to determine whether a student should be accelerated, and that there are multiple opportunities to refer students for an evaluation. And so one thing that you should know that the law gives you a right to is to request an evaluation for your student to be considered for acceleration. But other educators can also refer students for possible accelerated placements, or if you're a family with a bright young child and you're considering early entrance to kindergarten, your preschool teacher or your pediatrician can also refer students for possible early entrance to kindergarten. In terms of the timeline, the law took effect this past summer on July 1, 2018, and I'll come back in a second to talk about why that date is important. Where we are now in our work with the Illinois State Board of Education is that they've introduced in draft form rules that schools are supposed to follow in implementing this law. They were a little bit late in introducing those rules, and that's caused some communication problems in some cases between families and schools. But we expect that those rules will be formalized in September when the State Board of Education meets September 11th and 12th. And we may have a need for some advocacy support from parents. So I'll share some information about how to follow this with us as this moves through the process. The other thing that might be worth sharing with educators at your school, if they're new to acceleration and they're just hearing about the law and going, oh my gosh, this new law took effect this summer, what do we do? IAGC, while on the one hand, we want to push schools to the right thing, we also want to help them be able to do that. And so the Illinois Association for Gifted Children has actually developed a model policy that school districts are free to download and use and adopt locally. And that policy was adapted from a policy that was developed for the whole state of Ohio. And I was part of that as well. And I can tell you that that policy has been in place for more than a decade now. And there have been follow-up studies that have found that overwhelmingly the students that are identified for accelerated placements through that process have been overwhelmingly successful, both academically and in terms of their social and emotional outcomes. Their educators, their families, and the students themselves are happy with the decisions that were made. And so we're encouraging Illinois school districts that are new to this to start with that policy and then to customize that over time to their own districts as things kind of evolve. A few other things that you should be aware of. And you don't know if this is happening maliciously or innocently out of misinterpretation of the law. But one thing to be aware of is that if you look at local district policies that were in place before July 1, and we know of some districts where this is still the case, you'll find language in those policies that talks about early entrance to kindergarten that says something like this. District X follows Illinois school code, that's the state law, which specifies that to enter kindergarten, children must be 5 years of age by September 1 of their kindergarten year and at least 6 by September 1 for their first grade year. In other words, families with these very bright 4-year-olds have been coming to their districts and schools have said, oh, well, we understand, but the law says we can't consider you for accelerated placement. You should know that that's not true. The intent of the law that was in place before this summer wasn't to keep districts from admitting any students that were younger than typical to school. It was to ensure that they couldn't turn away any students that had already reached that minimum age. So this was actually a piece of legislation that was originally intended to make sure that if a student had a developmental delay or a significant disability, that schools weren't discriminating against those students and trying to get families to keep them home. So it's about guaranteeing a right at a certain age. But the law has always allowed school districts to admit students that are younger than the typical age guidelines, quote, based on an assessment of a child's readiness to learn. And so if a school tries to tell you, even though we understand where you're coming from, we're just not allowed to admit your child because they're too young, push back on that because the law is on your side. So essentially what changed then with the passage of the Accelerated Placement Act with respect to early entrance to kindergarten, it's basically that districts now need transparent policies and processes for considering students for early entrance. So before the law said districts may admit students that are younger based on an assessment of readiness, What is in place now is that they must have a process for admitting younger students, and they need to be transparent about how families access that process and what that assessment looks like. A few frequently asked questions that we've heard: if a student who is subject accelerated takes a high school course while they're otherwise still a middle schooler, can they earn credit? The answer to that is yes. And there's a link here if you want to look at the graduation requirements, but the law specifically does allow students in grades 7 and 8 who are taking high school level courses from their high schools or the virtual school to earn credit, and requires them to treat that the same way in their GPA calculation. So if it's a like an honors class where there's a weighted grade, that should still carry forward. And then the last thing that we wanted to mention is that one of the things that we've heard from the Chicago schools is that they want to go slow on acceleration, but that's okay because they don't need to do as much acceleration as other school districts because there are these other programs in place. There are the selective enrollment schools. There are the regional gifted centers across the city. But what we say to that is that, first, two things. If you're in a school that doesn't have, or a district that doesn't have other kinds of programs or services for gifted and advanced students, acceleration is a way that we can make a big impact at a very low cost. Even in a really high need school or school district that doesn't have the money or doesn't have the space for a special class for gifted students, if you have a student who's a third grader that is advanced in reading, odds are there's a fourth grade class there that they can go to and learn to read. And that's why we've prioritized acceleration in our advocacy efforts. Then second, even in a school that does have other options for advanced learners available, acceleration still has added value. This needs to be something, we need to look at the services that we provide as not either or, but as something that we mix and match. So one thing that we know from doing evaluations of a lot of school districts that do have pretty significant gifted education programs is that even within those special classes, there is a wide range of ability and needs. And so you might narrow that a little bit by grouping students into a special class for gifted students, but there are always students that are, a year or so advanced, and then by the time they're in middle and high school, in many classes, there are some students that are 5, 6, 7 or more years above grade level. And even though they both might be considered gifted students or advanced students, the level of curriculum that they need is going to be very different. And so acceleration can add another layer to those services that can be really valuable. So again, it's not an either or, it's both and. It's about mixing and matching and encouraging districts to incorporate acceleration into a continuum of other kinds of programming and services to meet all of the unique needs of the students. So I'm going to pause right there and kick it back to Limiola for a moment, and then we can take a few questions.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Thank you so much. Wow, this was a lot of information. And I learned something new as well. We do have some questions that I guess there's some parents who are itching to get some questions going, but this has been very helpful. I think we need to just let everybody know you will get a copy of the slides in the handout. So we'll make sure you get that as well. And if there's no problems with the audio, that would be perfect. That was my husband you saw walking through the screen, so I apologize for that disturbance there, but I've got it basically, as long as you can hear the audio and get the slides, then we should be good to go. This is wonderful news because I know that some parents have shared with me the misconception about the birth date for kindergarten, that you had to be 5 at a certain date. And I think you're the first person who really cleared that up for us,
Okay.
Eric, so thank you so much for that. I also have a parent who is basically saying that they have a child who's in third grade at a private school, and they would like to transfer to a public school, but then they were told that because of the child's birth date being in October, then the child would have to um, repeat that third grade. Now, I can attest in my personal situation, I had my twin daughters in a private school at kindergarten, and when we entered the public school system, they had to repeat kindergarten. So I can certainly empathize with what this parent is sort of going through with the frustration, because I did have my children that had to repeat. So is there any validity to that, or how can we help the parent sort of navigate that?
I can address the kindergarten issue explicitly. It's in the existing kindergarten admission statute, and that's linked in the slides as well. So if you're interested in seeing the specific text of that, definitely go back and check out that link. But the kindergarten and first grade entry law does explicitly state that if a student has completed kindergarten in a private kindergarten, then they must be admitted to first grade if they come back into a public school. So they shouldn't, I'm sorry, I'm really sad to hear that they had your child repeat kindergarten, because that shouldn't have happened under the law. It's fuzzier at other grade levels, but I'll tell you, one of the things that we pushed really hard for, and it's actually included in the model policy that IAGC put out, is that we think that local policies should require the development of a basic plan for accelerated students, so that when they move back and forth, if they go from private school to public school and back, or if mom or dad gets a new job and they move to another school district in another part of the state, there's that opportunity for continuous progress. And IAGC advocated for inclusion in the rule that the State Board of Education will be looking at in September, a provision that does say that once a student is accelerated, that placement be documented, and then that student be provided opportunities to make continuous progress going forward. Because when we were doing research on acceleration in Ohio, and we were going to all these school districts and looking at what had happened before they passed their legislation, one of the horror stories that we heard in several places was that there was a principal in a building or a senior administrator in a district that was philosophically opposed to acceleration. But there were individual classroom teachers that knew, hey, this student is really advanced. We can't meet their needs in second grade. So the third grade teacher and I are going to get together, and we're just going to sneak the student down the hall so they can get the advanced math. And then the next year, the third grade teacher would kind of do the same thing with the fourth grade teacher. And then the following year, the fourth grade teacher would kind of do the same thing with the fifth grade teacher. But now the students in fifth grade, and the level of reading that they need is at the middle school in sixth grade, but there's never been anything documented. And so what has often happened in those cases then, where it's just been kind of this stealth, behind the scenes kind of accelerated placement, is that schools have said, nope, we never approved this in the first place. Fifth grader, you're taking fifth grade reading again. And when we think about it, this is a student that we were moving up in the first place because they were already an advanced learner. And then to now have that advanced learner have to repeat a whole year of instruction is really disrespectful of that student's time and really a lost opportunity. So we are pushing to make sure that once students are accelerated, that those placements get documented, so that parents and the educators that initiated those accelerated placements have something to go on to make sure that no other students find themselves in that situation where they've already mastered the content, but because they move or because the administration changes, now they have to repeat that.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing. That's a wealth of information. We have some questions coming in. You had mentioned that you were going to share a copy of the model policy. That was very interesting. And this, again, was the policy that you helped develop in Ohio for the Department of Education. That is a good template that we can share with educators.
Yes. Ohio developed, they passed legislation several years before, and so they developed this research-based policy that the National Association for Gifted Children subsequently kind of endorsed, and then a group of us with the Illinois Association for Gifted Children took that Ohio policy, went through the new Illinois law line by line by line, and tailored that to fit Illinois' new legislation exactly. So if a district just wants to take that off the shelf and adopt it, they'll immediately be in compliance with the law, and they can be confident that they're adopting a policy that has been thoroughly vetted and we know produces good results when people follow it and implement it with fidelity.
Okay, I'm going to do some screen sharing here. I can find that. I know we have a parent who is within the Chicago Public School District and actually reached out to the school district. We have several parents who did, and they've been told that, I don't know, can you see the screen? Am I sharing my screen at this point? I'm not sure. Okay. Here's some real live examples, actually, from a school district in Blue Island and another one in Park Ridge. These are actual kids whose families worked with their school district. And the boy you see on the left is a 4-year-old boy. That's his older brother next to him. And he basically is starting kindergarten early. He showed great potential in advanced academics, and his mother worked with the school district leveraging this new law, this new act. And so we do have success stories, and I think it's important to share that, because sometimes you feel like you may be the only one going at it alone, but I believe the more we share this information, and Eric had mentioned that there's an organization called the Illinois Association for Gifted Children. I highly encourage you to get involved. It's not necessary that your child be enrolled in a gifted program for you to participate for membership, but these actual examples came from that organization that's sort of curating the examples of children who are benefiting from this. There's another child that you see here with the graduation cap, and he again is I believe starting either one grade level ahead or starting school earlier. The point is that there are great opportunities to help children who really need to be academically challenged so that they're not bored. And based on the research that Eric had highlighted for us, we can now see the importance of this and some of the concerns, hopefully, that many parents have shared with me about the social emotional concerns that they may have with having their child exposed to a higher grade level or classroom level. Some of these concerns are really unfounded, and we really need to leverage the research that's out there. Again, there's a model out in Ohio. They've been using a similar program for well over a decade, and they're finding great success. And it's our time. Like I said, my kids are I have my daughters who will be finishing up high school this year. My son is already in college. So I'm at the end of the road, but my passion is to help other parents. So this is why I want to make sure that you are empowered with valuable information that's going to help you. We do have a question from a parent who contacted CPS, and I know neither of us are speaking on behalf of CPS, Chicago Public School, but this parent is indicating that they were informed that a waiver was received. Do you know anything about a waiver?
Yeah, if we can skip ahead to the next slide with the advocacy alert, I can talk specifically about this because this is important. And this is an area where the Illinois Association for Gifted Children is really trying to go to bat to make sure that all districts implement this law this year. So our position is that the law explicitly says that it takes effect July 1, 2018. And the law was passed in August of 2017. So that language was included specifically with the intent of, at that time, giving schools a year to prepare and implement. And we've been reaching out to districts all over the state to help them do that ever since the law was passed, and actually even before that. But the Chicago Board of Education is seeking to delay implementation of this new law until the 2019 and 2020 school year. But how they're approaching that is actually trying to get, remember I mentioned the State Board of Education is going to be reviewing rules on implementation for the entire state this next month in September. They're trying to actually get those rules changed so that schools' obligation to provide opportunities for early entrance to kindergarten, whole grade acceleration, and subject acceleration don't kick in until 2019, 2020. What you should know as a family, if you're getting pushback, is that the law as it's written really doesn't provide a provision for anybody to be for any district not to implement this. So our position, and we're following up with legislators to get reinforcement on this, but they need to be implementing this now. They're out of compliance with the law. We actually need your help to make sure that they don't drag their feet on this. So the Illinois Association for Gifted Children, and on the third bullet on this slide here, you can see a link to our Facebook page. If you have sought acceleration for your student, and hit a brick wall or been told we're not doing this now, we're not doing it until next year, or we don't have a process in place, please reach out to us or email Carolyn Welch, and I'll add her email address into the chat box here because we want to connect with parents that are hearing this and engage you in some of our advocacy efforts and make sure also that you get the information that you need. My advice to you, and I can email Lemuela after this and cite the specific section of the law, but because the law, one, does have that implementation date of July 1, 2018, and because it does give families an explicit right to refer the student for accelerated placement, we would encourage you to contact, send a letter, send an email to your principal or to an administrator at CPS and say, I know that the law gives me the opportunity to refer my student. Consider this email my referral. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you about what the process is, because legally they really shouldn't be telling you no. And to this point, no waiver has been granted, and we actually don't believe there's an opportunity for ISB to grant a waiver. But we're working hard right now, reaching out to the Illinois State Board of Education and working hard to reach out to the legislature to make sure that this is an opportunity that's available in every district, because everybody in the whole state has had more than a full year to get ready for this, and there are a ton of resources that are out there to help them implement it. So we believe that this needs to be something that CPS moves on sooner rather than later, because your kid needs to learn this year, not next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you don't want them aging up. And then also I would mention that for some of you parents, you may be new and haven't gone through the selective enrollment process within CPS, and some of you may be joining and you have gone through that process, and perhaps your child cutoff score was either they made it and they didn't have a seat, or there wasn't a spot available in a particular school, and you sort of gave up. this is the time where you're going to need to, pull yourself up by your bootstrap and just really advocate for your child, because no one else is going to do it better than you as a parent. And this is a golden opportunity. Like I said, with my story, I wish I had this information that you have today. And it really could have saved me a lot of time and energy. And then also, um, provided a much more smoother and enjoyable process for my children during their academic journey. And I just want all of you who, have joined us, and if you know of any parents um, who might benefit from this, please, share the information, start to communicate, spread the word, talk to your teachers, talk to the district. You got to get involved in this one so you can have a seat at the table, and that we can continue to have wonderful programs that meet the needs of our high ability children. On the next slide here, we've been answering questions, and we'll come back and see if there's any more questions. Just want to do a couple of save the dates here that are very important. We weren't, for those of you who had some intricate questions that we weren't able to get to, we are going to have a live event Sunday, October 21st in the city of Chicago. This is our annual event that the Critical Thinking Child and Chicago School GPS conducts jointly. And that's What's on the Test, Understanding CPS Gifted Testing and Admissions. We're also going to have a guest speaker join us who's going to talk more about the Acceleration Act and any additional information between now and then that we'd like to share with parents. So we're going to have somebody from Eric's team join us. So please save the date, plan on joining us. We'll let you know when registration is available to sign up for that event. Also, we'd like to point out the annual conference with the Illinois Association for Gifted Children. I've attended this conference as a speaker and as a parent, and they have wonderful workshops. Again, there's a lot of information to learn, and the speakers do a great job. It's a highly organized conference that takes place typically around January and February of each year, and they also have a Saturday parent workshop. So just save the dates. This is 2 more events that, as things progress, we're at the beginning of the school year. CPS doesn't start until after Labor Day. So I know one school has started, and the kids are back in their routine. You're going to come up with some questions about this process. And so stay tuned. And if you have additional questions, feel free to email us so that we can link in with Eric and his amazing committee. They've done such a wonderful job with shaping the policy, and Eric sharing his wisdom from his prior life as a director there with Ohio Department of Education, and working on policies for accelerated children. Here is the link. Some of you may be familiar with the Center for Talent Development. It's a well-known program. They have online gifted links program as well. If you go to the website, it talks all about eligibility and how to get started. So be sure to check that out. Last, if you have any information or rather any questions, there's my email address. You can visit the website and check out some of the programs we're going to be offering in the upcoming weeks to support parents throughout the school year. Okay, at this time, let's see, we're going to wrap it up. I just want to check and make sure we got all the questions. So thank you everybody for attending. There's one more question here. If you hit a wall with the Accelerated Placement Act and CPS, please email. Okay, so that's what Eric is saying. Okay, so there's an email that he's provided. So if you're having stumbling blocks, there's resources and there's a support team available for you. So you don't have to do this alone.
And that's Carolyn Welch, and she's the my co-chair of that policy and advocacy committee with IAGC. And so we can provide you with additional information if you reach out to her. I'm going to be out of town for a couple of days, but then we'll be back. But we're also, like I said, because this isn't all done yet. We still have a ways to push, the rock up the hill. So we're still looking for families to get involved with that advocacy effort. So if you're interested and willing to work with us to help make sure that these opportunities become available for everybody, please let Carolyn know or send a private message to IAGC on Facebook, and we'll follow up with you and get you plugged in. It takes a village to get these things done. And so
That's right.
this is a time where we really need your help and want to help you.
Okay, great. It seems like we're out of time. I did promise Eric that it would go no longer than an hour. So we're right at that time. I want to thank you so much. I know you're a very busy person wearing multiple hats, as he shared with us earlier. So thank you all parents for coming on. This is just the beginning. And again, any questions, field it to us and we'll work together jointly to provide the best solution possible. So thank you and enjoy your Labor Day weekend. Have a great day and bye for now.